Talk about that 1987 final. You talk about iconic moments. You scored 23 points in the championship against Syracuse, 7 for 10 from three-point range. Was that kind of an out-of-body experience? Wasn't all that?
Welcome to episode 10 of Iconic Seasons 1987, the year that saw one of the most iconic matchups in NCAA basketball history. On today's episode, we're going to be wrapping up our series and giving you a taste of Season 2. With the championship trophy and rings back in Bloomington, we're talking legacy and history for IU. We then shift to an interview and trailer for Season 2 of Iconic Seasons. This upcoming season centers on 1979, the year March went mad. Magic versus Bird. If you made it this far, you're a fan of basketball. You won't want to miss our conclusion. If you've enjoyed our series and haven't done so yet, leave us a rating and or review. This is episode 10 of Iconic Seasons 1987. What are your thoughts just about this whole process, going through this Final Four and thinking about it?
I think that I gained some appreciation for how the game changed when it changed and understanding why it did. I mean, I didn't really know a whole lot about before three-point shot. I didn't really do a whole lot of research. And after watching some of the early games before the trip and stuff like that, before the three-point line, and seeing, I don't know if I would have been able to be a basketball player. I'll be honest, because it would have been so hard, the excitement of just...
You would have been a different basketball player. Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, the excitement. When I grew up, it was the excitement. I was a huge Pacer fan, so Reggie shooting threes. I'd go outside and envision that. Could you imagine just wanting to go outside and shooting jump shots, hoping that you got a jump shot? The excitement of the game just changed the whole game, right? And then seeing Syracuse and seeing how Boeheim allowed them to be them. Douglas behind the fake behind the back pass. That probably... I don't know if Bob Knight would have let that fly. At that moment, he better make sure he makes that layup, and then he's probably getting yelled at also. You know what I mean? Because he'd be like,
Maybe.
There's no showboating in basketball. Just shoot the damn layup.
Yeah.
Okay, so because it was a different kind of air back then. They didn't really like flashy. Flashy was for the streets.
He was letting go a little bit at this, letting him run in the UNLV game. He definitely, you can tell there was a change in Bob Knight over the course of this run they did here. Although if you listen to the Sean Kemp recruiting story, you might argue otherwise.
I did listen to it. That's pretty.
First thing, okay, how much money are you getting me?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when we were recruiting. It was the year after we won it all. We were recruiting Sean Kemp and Chris Mills.
Wow.
Okay.
Yep.
And so we're recruiting those guys. They come in, and Mills is from California, so Garrett and I are both from California. We take him out. Callaway and Smart take Kemp out. And this is on Saturday, and we're, we all run around, have a good time. And Sunday we come back, and they're gone now, and we got practice at 5:30 on Sunday. And coach walks in and says, all right, everybody have a good time this weekend. Get a football game. We knew we had these guys in. Yeah, it's great. All right, where are we with Kemp and Mills? And it's dead silent. Dead silent. Hey, where the hell are we with Mills and Kemp? They're the two best players in the country. We need these guys. Silent. Ricky, God damn it, where are we with Kemp and Mills? And he said, Coach, they're not coming. God, what do you mean they're not coming? He goes, Coach, they want money and they want a car. Because Kemp and these guys were asking, where's your ride, Ricky? Where's your ride? Hey, man, I ain't coming unless I have a ride.
Yeah.
And when Ricky says, well, Coach, they're wanting money and they want a car, Knight goes just like this. Well, fuck them. They can go to Kentucky.
Try.
We all knew about that stuff way before. I mean, let's be honest. And that's what killed IU for years. If they weren't willing to give people money.
Yeah.
I mean, the NCAA, they just... I'm not going to get into that.
Yeah.
That's a different story. But
that's a different podcast.
What did you learn from this?
So my biggest takeaway is thinking more about the three-point line, because I enjoyed these games so much, and I enjoyed that there was an ability to think about playing the game in a different way. It seems so universal the way you have to play now. If you can't shoot, even though now there's a little maybe breaking into the ice in the NBA, where there's a little like Jokic in there, where he's not just shooting threes. Durant, Booker, you know, their team is a little like maybe not, but I just think that the fun I had watching the 3-point team in Providence lose to Syracuse with the big guys, and then IU, even though the UNLV hits all these threes, they win, and then they hit threes in the championship game. So you kind of had it all, which I really enjoyed. And then I think the coaching personalities really stood out. There are still great coaches today and still great coaching personalities, but none that seemed bigger than the game anymore.
Callaway's improvement had a lot to do with his being benched when we played Ohio State. You can talk about all the motivational speeches and phrases and devices in the world, but the greatest motivator of all is your ass on the bench. There is no better motivator. Ass meets bench. Bench retains ass. Ass transmits signal to brain. Brain transmits signal to body. Body gets ass off bench and plays better. I mean, it's a hell of a sequence of things that takes place. Well, it might be for you guys.
I think Shire will probably be a good coach at Duke. I love Woody at IU, but they don't seem to hold the zeitgeist the way that these coaches did. Even Pitino, who's so young at this point, obviously, since he's still coaching, just has a grasp over the game and a command of the sideline, and the cameras, the way that they find them is just so different than the coaches now. They still try to do that and drum it up, but it just doesn't click as much when they show the coaches now. It's not, I'm never like really wanting to know more about them, I guess. Yeah. I just kind of like, oh yeah, that's so-and-so's coach.
And I felt like these coaches back then, you know, we did a thing a while back about 5-star the camp or whatever.
Yeah.
And all these big coaches go in there and learning from each other. I just doubt that really, I mean, they might text somebody or something, but they don't get that experience. Like they talked about, like after the camps, they would go and they would talk strategy and go have a couple beers or whatever. It was almost like it was
like a fraternity.
Of coaches back then. You know what I mean? And I don't think that's the same case. Shire doesn't have the same history as these guys do. Not saying anything bad about him. I'm just saying, like, Woody has a little bit just because.
Well, the history seemed more siloed. Yeah. Woody's history is with IU. Shire's history is with Duke. It's a vertical rather than horizontal, where they would go to a place and intermingle. The Duke guys stick with the Duke guys. Yeah. The IU guys stick with the IU guys. Because these programs have grown into their own little corporations. You know, it's not like the NCAA together. It's now Duke's its own brand, its own thing. So I think that's something that's changed so much. You know, that's why the Jumbotron would not be behind the players, because you've got 12 people working on the Jumbotron alone.
And the rims would all be the same.
Yeah. They wouldn't switch out. They wouldn't switch for harder rims for the Final Four. Hey, let's get those hard rims out. We had those in the back room. We haven't tried those out this year.
I guess one other takeaway I got was I've never seen somebody pass the ball, get fouled, and the guy score, and that guy get 2 free throws. I've never seen that either. So that's something that I was blown away by too.
On the flip side, I will say, I think we hit on this in both things with Bill Walton, that the announcers today do help a lot. They bring a ton of excitement to the game, and I think that is a cool evolution. The camaraderie and the fanfare around the Final Four and the tournament is so much fun now. They have really figured out how to maximize that. It is a blast every year. The announcers are having fun and bringing excitement to every play. You know, guys like Steph Curry, I don't know if they really happen in 1987, because they don't make it all the way to the Final Four. Like, they wouldn't make it into the ether. It almost seems like he won a national championship, even though he never got close.
Well, they've really learned how to maximize stories, or maximize just that basketball is a game, but for them, it's about the entertainment. I feel like back, listening to these, it was more, the broadcasters were more about information. They've studied the information.
Yeah, they're Walter Cronkite.
And they're just going through the motions of what they believe. There wasn't supposed to be any outlandish rants or any of that. It was supposed to be professional. It's a job that you take very seriously and get the stats. And that's how you were pictured if you If you knew the stats, you gave good information, you were a great broadcaster. That's how, in this generation, that's what it was, besides the entertainment part of it, right?
We'll have to see. I'll cut it in there. There's a great clip of Knight talking to Billy Packard after the game, and he tells Billy that he thinks it was a thinking man's game, and Knight goes, well, then you understood it? just like those breaks. That is so like that he's so far ahead of his time. Yeah. His comedic approach to the game and willingness to be more honest than most people on the planet at the time definitely made him stand out as well.
His willingness to not care.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be me.
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, I don't really give a blank.
But even today, it still seems startling to watch.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. How are you? Adam Sandler, still here, Indiana University, having a beautiful time. Soon coming up is the cutest co-ed, but before that, I'm trying out for the Hoosiers right now, Indiana Hoosiers. I'm having a good time. A few friends of mine are here. They're okay at ball. You got Dean, Keith, and Steve here. Nice guys. I'm going to show you fellas what I can really do. I'm pretty good. You know? Okay, here we go. Let's see it. He's a wheeler. I can jam.
Dean, too.
Coleman throws the ball to Cycling. He damn near beats the ball to Cycling. So now we've got a double team on Cycling. You'd have won that game, and this would be hard for a kid to do, but you would have won the game if Coleman would have stayed out of bounds. But he steps in bounds, and Keith Smart. Now, Keith Smart does two things that were more important than the shot he made, and this is one. So now Cycling has the ball. He's doubled up. Coleman comes in. Cycling throws it to Coleman. Keith is out here on the floor, but right in front of our bench. And on the pass to Coleman, Keith damn near slaps the ball, but doesn't quite get it. And he grabs Coleman's arms and spins him around, and they call a foul on Keith. That was the thing that cost you the game. I mean,
you knew Coleman was not a clutch free throw shooter, or you knew that he just wasn't a good free throw shooter?
He just wasn't a good free throw shooter. He had a very low percentage. He was the best guy to foul, but I've always made.
And missed two.
Huh?
And missed two. He missed.
Yeah, missed both of them.
You were just hoping he'd miss one. Figuring the odds.
No, I don't pray for little things. I said, God, help that son of a bitch miss both of them out there. So I don't bother the Almighty with chicken shit stuff. Make it something that's really going to be worthwhile.
Ever nervous you're going to maybe lose that game? You're playing against three guys that end up being three pretty good pros. You didn't have one pro on your team.
Well,
that's what kills me, man.
But then what happens now is he misses the two free throws, and we got another situation where another great play. A kid named Darrell Thomas is under the bucket, and he gets the ball. Now there's probably, I don't know, maybe 12, 14 seconds left. He gets the ball, and now Cycling and Coleman have him umbrellaed. And I would be willing to bet that this is the only player that was ever smart enough to do this. Instead of going up and getting it blocked, which ends the game, he gives a little fake, has some room, and throws the ball out to Smart.
Every little kid goes through in the bedroom shooting a trash can. Backyard shooting a hoop, taking a shot to win, and I've always had a vision of doing something like that. I started having this dream vision my freshman year, where I was a part of a team, and I was not involved in the action, but at the end of the dream, I was in the middle of all the celebration. I was in a huge arena. Now, where this huge arena would be, I had no idea. And that morning, I woke up probably around very early, 4 o'clock in the morning, couldn't sleep, and it was clear. And so as the game moved on, now Syracuse started to make their run, and Coach Knight came up to me and said, are you ready to play? And I said, yeah. He said, well, I'm giving you a couple minutes, and if you haven't done anything in a couple minutes, I'm taking you out of the game. Things started to work for me, started to open up, and I started to make plays for myself and also for my teammates. Then you move into this environment that not a lot of people get into. You get into the zone. You don't hear anything else going on around you. You he trusted us, Coach Knight did, trusted us enough that we were going to find the right situation for that moment. So I went inside to Darrell Thomas, and he didn't have anything. As a senior, he could have forced it up there, and he passed it back out to me, and then I had to make a play. The ball goes in, and that's when I hit an explosion.
Who's wide open?
Because Smart wasn't the first option, obviously. Or was it not like that?
Williams, whoever we could. Alford was the first option.
Right.
But they really defended him. We couldn't get him the ball. But in all the 40 years that I coached, that's the smartest play I ever saw. When Darrell Thomas shot fake to get a little room, he spun and threw the ball to Smart about 15 feet away. He hit the
Now,
judge.
before the game, obviously you weren't favored in this game. Syracuse was. Were you all confident, or were you saying, wow, we're going to have to play a great game?
No, I always thought we could win. We didn't always win, but I always thought we could. If you were to ask Boeheim after the game was over, I heard him say this later. I said, that's a hard loss. I said, I know that. I said, but you'll win this. That's pretty nice of me.
I thought you'd send him some flowers and thank him for the gift.
No. Because sometime later, what's his name was coaching at Kansas.
Roy Williams?
Yeah, it's coaching at and Syracuse wins.
Yeah, wins that tough game. That was a tough game.
And it was, things could have easily gone the other way, like in this game you're talking about. And so Syracuse wins, and Williams had come close with his team a couple of times.
Yeah, he did.
And Boeheim told him after the game was over, because Williams told me this. He said, when Indiana beat us, and when we had a really good team, he said, Coach Knight told me to hang in there. He said, you'll win this someday. And he said to Williams, he said, so I'm telling you what he told me.
Which is a little bit worse probably because there's a little bit more importance involved in this game than any other game. But no, it doesn't feel good.
Down here with Coach Bob Knight and his hero Keith Smart. Bob, your reaction now to a third championship for you as a coach.
It was so great. To me as a coach, it doesn't mean anything, Brent, and I mean that from this standpoint. Sure, I'm tickled, but for these kids to come back like they did and to hang in the game the way they did, and for these last 2 years, my first thought is what these kids have done, and especially what this kid right here has done.
And how about the young man Keith Smart who spent time on your bench who came in? Keith, tell us about the winning field goal.
Well, I don't know about the winning field goal, but I just know if we had some time on the clock, the guy we've been together for so long that we was going to be all right. The shot just came to me, I was able to hit it.
It's been a long, hard road for you. I didn't know if you were going to be the man to take that last shot, but Keith came in there and did it for you.
He's done it all year when they've jumped to me and guarded me tight. He's always opened up things, and he's been great to play with this year. This is all worth it, all worth it. National champ.
What did it feel like coming all the way from junior college in 1 year to lead a team to the ground?
Nothing can match the way I feel right now, But we've been together for so long, and I'm going to miss this guy right here, as well as all the rest of the seniors.
Super job for Ryu. Here is the winning shot. We take another look at it. Darrell Thomas, your thoughts about that winning field goal?
Well, it was designated for Steve, of course, but the ball was moving the ball around. And then they threw it into me. I looked at Turner Coleman, shot fake, he didn't move. So I saw Keith on behind me, so I kicked it out to him and bucket. It was bucket.
Joe Hillman, how did you view the play?
I just saw the same thing as Darrell saw. He kicked it in the post. It was meant to go to Steve. He kicked it back out to Keith. Keith went to the baseline and shot it. I went right to the bucket for a board or anything, and it went straight down, and that was it.
We hope that you've enjoyed our breakdown of the 1987 Final Four. We've covered the players, the coaches, and the stories that made the tournament so iconic. Now, we're excited to announce that we're working on Season 2 of the podcast. We'll be taking a deep dive into the 1979 season, the year March 1st went mad. The 1979 season featured one of the most iconic rivalries in NCAA history, Larry Bird versus Magic Johnson. If you want to make sure that Season 2 happens, please tell a friend to listen to Season 1, and stay tuned to hear the trailer for Season 2. We also have a special interview coming your way today. We're talking to Randy Mills, who's writing a book about Larry Bird's high school playing days in French Lick and his first steps towards Indiana State and the iconic 1979 championship game. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this special interview. And don't forget to tell a friend about the podcast.
Getting set here for what promises to be one tremendous championship game for the National Intercollegiate Basketball title. I don't know what more you could ask. You know, we started this season, 6 months ago. If you'd have tabbed it right then on two of the storybook stories that could have come out of the season, one would have had to be Larry Bird. Here was a guy who could have passed up the season of college basketball and moved on to the pros. But instead, he stuck around for an ideal that belonged to Terre Haute, Indiana, belonged to Indiana State. And now, after 33 games, he has, as unlikely as it seems, taken that team to within one game of the championship. Conversely, look at it this way. There is Irvin Johnson, a young man who many say this will be his last college game, that he will not be able to resist the lure of the pros, and that Irvin Johnson will indeed move on to pro basketball. That still remains to be seen. But you've got to wonder, we are tonight looking at perhaps
The culmination of that season was the matchup between Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, whose humble beginnings are the bedrock of what made the rivalry and that season so memorable. The night before the game, the producers of NBC Sports wanted to air a spot about Indiana State coach Bob King, who had to step aside at the beginning of the season. Don Ohlmeyer, a bombastic man, said, "What about Magic and Bird?" Larry and Magic delivered, as they always have.
Individual players than Larry Bird, the player of the year from Indiana State, and the magic man from East Lansing, Irvin Johnson.
You know, a lot of people were surprised yesterday, Larry, when you mentioned that you played ball with Magic Johnson in the World Invitational Tournament.
Well, you know, me and Magic played together in that game, and, you know, it's funny because Magic's such a great passer, but he wouldn't give me the ball. You know, and I need the ball.
Well, I hope you don't think I'm going to pass it to him tonight either, but I thought I passed him the ball. Maybe he forgot it. Or
Rebound Johnson. Magic Johnson with the ball. Oh, he scores! And he is fouled. Look at
her. There's still one measure that makes this game undeniably iconic, 24.1. That's the rating for the number of televisions tuned in to watch the game, a quarter of all television sets in America. It remains the highest rating for any basketball game, college or pro, in the history of the sport. This story could have any number of starting points, but it's impossible not to tell the story of a kid from French Lick, Indiana, and another Midwest kid from Lansing, Michigan. Our chosen start is on location in southern Indiana. It begins in 1974 in French Lick, Indiana, where Larry Bird's long and winding road to the championship game had its origins. So welcome to the podcast, Randy.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. In basketball that I didn't think much of till a few years ago when I wrote the memoirs. And that's when I got interested in, hey, there's some other stories out here. And we can segue in now to when I started teaching at Lagodi, of all places.
Yeah, you know, I hear a lot of similarities too to we'll get into Larry's story, but you hit on, you know, basketball and your military history background. That's a popular thing in basketball and sports in general, to use those military terms too, to have that structure, especially in Indiana, the sort of types of coaches, that their mindsets at that time.
the discipline,
Yes,
the good sergeant, not the drill sergeant, but probably what they call the top sergeant in combat.
Yes.
That knows more than the officers,
Right.
The one that's going to get you out there alive,
Yeah.
the mess. And there's the interesting thing when I started putting things on Facebook about my high school stuff was all the hits I got. And all the comments I got and all the different sites I found about basketball, more so in Indiana than any other place. What am I going to write about next?
Yeah.
So I had been doing some work on outlaw gangs of Indiana, and then I'd done that blog on Larry Bird, as if by magic. And I saw, well, I'm getting a lot more hits on this than I'm getting on the outlaw. I was like, okay, that'll be my next book.
Yeah.
So that started me into the book thing. But there was, if you remember in that blog, there were all these personal contacts, which I call webs. Life has all these webs of connection that we don't realize. And then we start looking at things and we see, wow, this led to this, or these people were right on the edge with me. And now we're meeting again and we're sharing the same stories and we're seeing the same things. We don't always share the same stories because we see things differently. And that's been really an interesting part of my writing here about Larry Bird's high school days. The stories that Larry told, the stories that others told, the stories I heard later that people told, my recollections of seeing Larry play against Lagodi. It's been fascinating, especially for a writer, to somehow bring all that together and put it into a story that people want to read.
Yeah, this is like your 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, right? That somehow everyone's related back.
Absolutely.
That's amazing. So where did you start with a project like this? Because I'm always fascinated. You get the idea from your own experiences, and your own experiences kind of line up a little bit with Larry's, the small high school, even the relationship with your father and him coming from the war. I mean, that's a fascinating starting point.
I had the war, too, because his father had issues from the war. I had there it was right in front of me, and now you just mentioned it. Boom, yeah. So I've written 10 books. Well, this is my 10th book, and I've written just dozens and dozens and dozens of professional articles. And one of the things that I realized in looking back at those stories 2 or 3 years ago after I finished them is they're all autobiographical. They're all about something that meant something to me personally that I didn't realize it at the time. I thought, oh, this is just an interesting story. And then I look back and I realized, I'm working out my own stuff here, An Almost Perfect Season about my dad and I. That's about my dad and I. I use basketball as an excuse to get at something my dad died in 78 in the blizzard. He worked for the Illinois Department of Transportation. We didn't get to finish some of the conversations that I wanted to get with him, the things I wanted to ask him. So that was a way to go back and get some healing there. With Larry, it's about basketball again. So I move to Jasper. I live in Jasper. My first marriage, my first wife's teaching in Jasper. I'm teaching at Lagodi. I'm driving there. I'm in a carpool with Lee Kavanaugh. Lee, who is really the secret behind Jack Butcher's success, if you ask me, as an 8th grade coach. But we're driving up there. And so my dad wanted me to stay in Illinois and teach. He wanted me to play basketball there. And I didn't do that. And he wanted me to stay in Illinois, teach. And so I left. So when he came to visit me at Jasper, I took him up to Lagodi to show him where I was going to be teaching. And this was my first time in the building too, myself. So we walk in there, and I don't know if you've been in that foyer, but it's just full of trophy cases.
Yeah.
And so we're just oohing and awing because Dad's like me, or was like me. He knew all the stories of Southern Illinois basketball. In fact, he taught me. I knew all about the 40s and the 50s and the 60s because, I would listen to him, and he'd take me to ball games. This is all in my book, An Almost Perfect Season. So we're oohing and on, and there are a couple of students there, and my dad says, so you guys are pretty good, aren't you? And one of them actually was Wayne Flick, that was Larry's nemesis at that iconic ball game when Lagodi beat Jasper. But anyway, he was talking to Wayne Flick, and that was the first time I met Wayne. Wayne, by the way, pops up all over in my book. I didn't see that coming, but he's just there, even in grade school against Larry. He was just such a nemesis, Larry got kicked off the team his 8th grade year toward the end of it because he got mad he didn't like losing and he'd get really frustrated. So I thought, what game was it that did that for him? So I got a hold of the scorebooks.
Yeah.
I pulled the scorebooks, and there it is against Lagodi.
Wayne Flick.
Wayne Flick scores 16 points, and Larry Bird fouls out with 10.
Oh, wow. Amazing. You need those types of people, though. I mean, you mentioned that too in the way that you were measuring yourself growing up, and those moments where you're like, oh, here's one, hurdle to jump over. And it's like setting those up in front of you. That where's the next one? And to have that guy who's reaching for those same heights can be really important as well.
But here's the web again. I didn't see Wayne coming. Wayne's all through it. And in fact, I have an epilogue in the book of, I think, a very moving piece about bringing it all together. We go up there, and my he's suddenly a little bit better about me going over there because he sees all that tradition. Of course, I don't know. I don't understand what it means to teach at Lagodi. So the season starts, and they're playing. Lagodi's playing. I should back up a little bit. I first met Larry Bird when I knew him as Mark Bird's brother, because Mark and I went to Oakland City College together.
Okay. All right.
And Larry came to a couple of games, and I saw him and was aware of him because he looked like Mark. I thought, gee, he looks like Mark. Isn't that funny? It's all turned around now.
It is stunning too, because you've got a picture, and I'll add some of these pictures in too. Mark looks, it could be twins almost, besides how tall they are.
And one of the things I do and I'll get to this later, and it's important. So I start writing about Larry Bird, and I realize, wow, look at all these things that influence Larry that's not covered. Mark's tremendous impact on Larry. And so I have a whole chapter on that alone, plus before and after when Mark's in Larry's life. And so we'll talk maybe perhaps a little bit more about those kinds of things. So I knew Larry from that. He just looked like a shy kid. He would look down. He wouldn't look at you, because he was so shy. And so now go up a couple of years, and Lee Kavanaugh says, hey, come with me. We're going to go to Springs Valley. Valley's playing Lagodi. It'll probably be the conference championship game. So it's like 3:00. We just got back from come on, get in the car. We're going. I said, why? He said, we won't get a seat the way it is. It was estimated that there were 4,000 people in a gym that held 2,700. And they were 3 deep on the floor, out to the floor, to the edge of and you couldn't go down the aisles. They were sitting in the aisles, and they were 3 deep up around the top.
It's like a rock concert.
Yes. And so that's how that game started. And so that was another iconic moment, watching Larry play. And I can touch on this now, but I was going to mention this more in line with the things that I came across in writing. But in that particular game, the stories about that game are in every book about Larry Bird. And it's iconic. And Larry always said that's the game he wished he'd had back. And after they lost, he told everybody, says, don't worry about it. We'll get him in the regional, because they figured they would meet him in the regional. Everybody thought they'd meet him in the regional. Even when the regional started, they thought they would be in the final game together. That's another story.
Yeah.
So for both teams. But they're in that classic story, and you may be familiar with this, it is said that Larry, at a tip, they used to, after a jump ball, they would jump ball there underneath the goal there, around the free throw line, that Larry got a tip and turned and scored, got mixed up and scored in the Lagodi basket. And those points made the difference in the game.
Oh, wow.
Well, that's not true.
That's good. So, set the record straight.
Yeah, set the record straight. And you got to be careful with this, because the Larry Bird narratives, all these stories are set in concrete. And those high school stories were originally written in the first book that came out in 1982 by Lynn Korn. And he was a colleague of mine at Oakland City College, another connection. And he talked about writing about this when I started teaching there after that, the next year after the book came out. But he chronicled all these things, and all the other books pretty much repeat what he said. So he got it wrong, and then everybody else got it wrong. So how do I know it's wrong? Because good old Jerry Burge. Jerry Burge is like Wayne Flick in my book.
Okay.
he pops in there and becomes the main character. And, let's talk a little bit about the newspapers and the sports writers of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, which I consider to be a golden age of Indiana and Midwest high school basketball. The papers had 6 to 12 pages of sports.
Yeah.
And have you ever picked up an old paper? I mean, it's as tall as you are.
Right. It's wild. Yeah.
It's wild. It's thick and it's wide and it's tall. So Jerry Burge was sports writer there at the Jasper Herald, and I read his account. And he made that comment. He said Larry was called for walking, and when he scored, and the basket did not count. But then he said he mentioned the turning points, and he and this is not mentioned in all the other narratives, but Jerry nailed this. Jerry pointed out that the big turn of the game happened in the third quarter when Mike Mattingly knocked Larry down and kind of took the wind out of him, kind of knocked him out. Had to call an extra timeout.
Wow. Okay, so they're down one then. Yeah, down a timeout.
Well, they don't have any at the end of the game, and they forget that.
Wow.
Remember what happened?
They had
okay. Score and win, and Beezer called the timeout. And that's in all the books that Beezer screwed up.
Wow.
And that's the way Larry tells it too.
I was going to say, I wondered if Larry even remembers it like that, because sometimes our own memories are so faulty that if you read an account of yourself enough times, you can kind of
we're going to talk about that too.
Okay,
good. another thing, because the narrative has a number of those kinds of things. So another thing about that game that gets missed, the Louisville Courier writer picked up on, because that place was just packed with college coaches and sports writers, was that the unsung hero of the game wasn't Billy Butcher, who outscored Larry 36-30, I think. Was Wayne Flick guarding Larry underneath the basket. That's the sports writer caught that Larry had to go out. He couldn't, because Larry was used to scoring in and out. Now he could only score out. Now he scored a lot of points, but he didn't score in. And the Louisville Courier guide said that probably made the difference there.
Interesting.
Then at the end of the game, of course, they had a chance to win it, and Beezer got the ball and he couldn't throw it in, so he just called a timeout, and they didn't have it, and that was that. Now the coach took the blame for that, Gary Holland, because he said, I should have known that. He wouldn't know, and I should have known that we lost that extra timeout there. But again, you got Jerry Burge there, and I really ride Jerry because he's so detailed, and beautiful writing. It's just like, and I have a lot of this in the book because this is real time. This is like going back in a time machine.
Yeah.
When you read the things that I use in there, you're there with them, and that's what they're saying, and that's what they're writing about. And it's probably pretty damn accurate.
That's how they would write too. That's the narrative way, rather than, kind of the Stephen A. Smith style, giving you their opinion or take on it. They would really try to capture the moment of it.
Yes, and they're some of them are very skilled with the words they use to put you there too. And so I got to talk to Jerry about a week before he passed away, and I'm so fortunate to have connected with him because he shared so many stories, and those he's going to be in the book. In fact, the dedication is to him and all the sports writers that we can go back to and look at it. Would you like another story about?
Yeah, keep going. I love I'll put that picture in there too. You've got a photo of I think it is from that game where you're pushing, and the caption in it is pushing Larry Bird out. And again, we think of him as this like long range shooter, but I'm sure in high school, you're spending some time at 6'9" near the basket. And so putting anybody out of their comfort zone is going to be,
he was able to do that with most teams, but you got to remember, here's another element here too, and that's Jack Butcher, probably the greatest tactician of that day, and maybe any day when it came to how to win a basketball game, because if he put his mind to it, he could do it. And it was exciting to watch that slow down basketball because, believe it or not, nobody's scoring and you're standing the whole damn time, because they've only got a 2-point lead, or they got somebody up. So you'd be sweating bullets. But anyway, that's another story. So here's a story that's in all the books and in Larry's book Drive. And I'll tell you how Larry tells the story and what I found in the newspapers. And I want to back up and say this, Aaron. When I did my memoirs, and I started on it, and I started making notes about what I remembered, And then I started looking with the papers. I was stunned. I would have bet my life that what I remembered was how it happened. And then in the papers, I was about 50% wrong. But here's the funny thing. It wasn't 50% about things I did really well. It was both ways.
Yeah.
I was 50% wrong on the things I screwed up on. There were things I didn't remember I missed. The papers made a big deal out of. So memory is faulty.
Yep.
Not completely, because the spirit of what you're talking about is there. So let's look at Larry's sophomore year. Well, let's back up to the 8th grade year. So he's an 8th grader. He's been kicked off the team toward the end of the season. According to the books, Coach Jim Jones has the assistant coach, Gary Holland, who later is the head coach when Larry's a senior, go to Larry's mom before Larry's freshman year and tell her, look, Larry's good. He's going to be one of our better players, but he's going to have to learn to control his temper. And apparently he did. So he played his freshman year, which he says in Drive he didn't play very much. And I've not been able to look at those scorebooks. I did find some newspaper accounts, and he was one of the main scorers, but maybe not the main scorer. And then his sophomore year, he was about 6'1" and weighed about 135 pounds. Mark was in college then, so Larry got number 33. That was Mark's number. There's another thing that nobody knows. 33 is Mark Bird.
Oh yeah, so he's got that from his brother.
He got it from his brother. Huh. And another thing, and I'm going to get into this really quick because it's so interesting. I've been helping a group find pictures of Larry for something they're going to do. Well, it's a museum, and so I was looking through. I thought, okay, Magic Johnson. I want to find some high school pictures of Magic Johnson and put him up there with Larry Bird. And the first thing I noticed when I started looking at those pictures, do you know what Magic Johnson's number was?
33.
33.
Yeah.
I thought, damn.
Yeah.
Here we go. The way of do.
Those two for sure.
Yeah. So you know what his number was at Michigan State?
It's 33. There you go.
33.
Yeah.
So why didn't we notice that? They're both 33s, even in that game, that final game. There he is with 33.
Wild. Yeah.
So anyway, there's this picture of Larry in the varsity picture before his sophomore year starts, and he's standing behind Jim Jones, and he looks like a baby.
Yeah.
He's thin. He just looks like a baby, and he has this big jersey on with 33. And that year, the main player was Steve Land. Steve was a junior that year, and he'd started since the sophomore year, and he's going to end up breaking all the records, Marv Pruitt's records, every record in the record book there by the time he's a senior. And of course, the year before, they had won the sectional when Mark scored 2 free throws at the end of the game. And Larry was at that game, by the way, and he said that had a big impact on his life because he wanted that too. He saw
Interesting.
that.
I bet those packed gyms.
Yeah, and that was the first varsity game he went to. This is in my book. He didn't like to go. He hadn't. Can you believe that?
Crazy.
He wasn't interested, and he was shy, and he didn't like crowds.
Yeah.
So now he's seeing. After that, he's saying, "Yeah, I want that. How do you get that?" So he's still not there. So he's playing junior varsity his sophomore year, and hoping to be able to maybe dress by sectional time. And he breaks his ankle in the first game, junior varsity game. And so now he's not playing. He has the cast on. You probably know this story. They just shot around, foul shots and things, and had little kids shag for him. And so toward the end of the year, he wanted to play junior varsity again. And Gary Holland was concerned. He thought, we don't want to screw up his ankle. So he said, if you can run the killer sprints here, you can play. So he ended up playing about, I think, three junior varsity games. And he thought that was it. And then he found out he was going to dress for the varsity sophomore year. So this is a big deal in Indiana.
For sure.
So he's sitting on the bench, never played varsity before. First game, it's a close game with West Washington. It's nip and tuck. And he hears his name being called, and he thinks somebody back in the back row is hollering at him. It's the coach, get in the game. So Larry says in Drive, in paraphrasing here, so I remember it. Larry says in Drive, I go in the game and I make a basket, pandemonium. and I make another basket. Pandemonium. I'm passing them, getting rebounds. The next day, the newspaper headline, Larry Bird saves the day. So I'm reading that, and I'm thinking, I've got access now to all the newspapers.
Yeah, I got to see what they had to say.
So, I got to find this. So look. No headline. Oh, there's a box score. He made 2 out of 9.
Oh, wow.
One place had him 1 out of 9, and one place had him 2 out of 9.
Wow, amazing.
But he did score the 2 winning foul shots.
Okay.
So he got that right. And I did find a headline in the Courier-Journal that said, Land and Bird propel Valley. So he's remembering stuff that happened.
Right. And that's what you were saying, like that first time you see your name in the paper, that just capturing that snapshot, it doesn't matter what it says, as long as it's positive on some level. You're like, oh yeah.
And how else? It sort of said that. So how else would you remember it that way?
Incredible.
The other thing too was, and I really, after Jerry Burge, the main guy that I really went by on writing a lot of the narratives and capturing these games, was a guy named Harry Moore at the Paoli Republican. And he owned the theater there in French Lick too. He's from Orange County. And he had a narrative. He was like Jerry. He had a really good narrative. And he had a narrative that game. And he said, Bird comes in and scores 2 real quick baskets underneath. So he did score. He did make 2 out of 9. And he said it made a difference in the game. And of course, the foul shot. So Larry was correct in that. And of course, he says this is the big one that changed everything for him. Now, he has 3 different stories that he said were the big ones that changed everything for him. But that was one of them.
Yeah. That's amazing. Wow. I mean, the capturing like that sense of Indiana high school basketball too, growing up in Indiana myself, there is just that community around the teams that's really incredible. And even Southern Indiana, I feel like, is even closer knit than it was in Northern Indiana, because the schools are so small and the towns often, especially like Springs Valley, are so insulated that these guys are the entertainment in town. And so the feeling that they get from the people of the community is so unique, I think.
I talk about this in my book. I have a whole chapter on this about the ghosts that are there, it's like an iceberg that you're playing. When you play, you're going in a gym and people are coming in there, and this is a sacred ritual that's been going on for generations. And you're a kid, you don't know, but I felt that when I played in those old gyms. I felt those ghosts. I loved old gyms. I just felt like, man, it's that web. It's like, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think you're exactly right. One of the things that happened when I started writing the book was, it starts out being about Larry Bird and ends up being about Indiana basketball as being communal. Not just Larry, but all the people that helped make Larry great, and also put on that suit, and also had those coaches, and also learned about manly kinds of things, adult kinds of things, playing basketball. So that was interesting. I didn't see that coming, that I would end up interviewing these people. So when you read the book, it's going to be everybody's story. Larry's the main part of it, but all these other guys I interviewed and saw in the paper and wrote about are going to be a part of the picture too, because Larry couldn't have been what he was if he hadn't had that competition. And I think this comes from watching all those clips. So you watch a clip of anybody, their best games and their best moves, and you think, my gosh, they're a machine. But if you watch a game, and I remember watching Larry's, I had a video that had Larry's best games, and it had one of his games his last year that he played, and you could tell he was struggling. So I'm watching this game, and I think they're playing the Trailblazers, and they were the team to beat in those days. And Larry wasn't doing very good. He's missing shots. He was making mistakes. And I thought, why are they having this in? Why this game? But I start watching, and I think, my gosh, he's just grinding. He's not quitting. He misses one. He comes back. Now he makes one. He just grinds and grinds and grinds. And by the end of the game, he makes the shot somehow that puts him into overtime. And then he makes the shot that wins the game. And he ends up scoring 40 points. And there surely were some clips from that. But that's what you need to remember, I think, with Larry, that Larry lost games in high school. And there were guys that outscored him in games, especially back then. You had Kurt Gilstrap at Orleans that went to University of Louisville and ended up didn't like big school and came to Oakland City and was the best player probably we ever had there. You had Mike Liegers, who went to DePaul and set all the scoring records there at Jasper. You had Tim Eubank, who was a captain of the Purdue football team. It was 6'8" there at Paoli. He gave Larry fits. And Dave Smith, who went to Louisville and ended up playing all 4 years there, played at Milltown. So Larry had some great competition.
No kidding.
But and it made him better. It made him better. And, again, they didn't win every game. In fact, the best record that Jim Jones had was when Larry was a junior and when Steve Land was the main player. And they were 18-2. And there's a whole chapter in the book about this. I call it the lost season because they were 18-2 and they lost to Lagodi. That Wayne Flick knocked Steve Land down on a layup. That made the difference in the game there.
Amazing.
And good old Wayne. And Beezer had a shot at the end of that game. And the Louisville Courier, I got this from the sports writer there. He said that shot went up and it went down. It was spinning and it went down, way down in the net, spinning, and it came back up and went down and came back up about 3 times. And everybody was going, ooh, ah, ooh, ah.
Yeah.
And then it spun out.
Oh, man.
His hands. So those are great games. And of course, imagine a sports writer having fun with that. Larry was his second leading scorer on that team. They went 18-2, and they didn't win the conference. And then they got beat in the first game of the sectional in an upset. They would have went deep in the tourney. The next year, all Steve Land's records were all blown apart by Larry and then I got a chapter called The Lost Blackhawk about Steve. But these people helped make him better. I think Larry's team, they were 17-3 with Gary. So that Larry's junior year was actually a better year for the team.
Crazy. Well, give us one more story. I want to get you out of here, but I've had so much fun listening to this. I can't wait for this book to come out. I'll link the blog because it's excellent. But this is a great preamble.
Well, you can see from what I've told you, you can tell that blog that I've evolved.
Yes, yeah, I can hear how it's blowing out, and I think that's interesting because it goes into kind of what we've been talking about as the theme is this web. Each of those is a strand that you can start to pull on. And find more stories and more connections from that to really fill out the story of Larry Bird and just basketball in Southern Indiana. It's just this fascinating time capsule for basketball in Indiana, really, because like you said, it is a golden age for sure. It's that single class basketball. It's the sectional. For these small schools can be like winning the state championship. That even going back all the way to the Hoosiers story in the 50s.
I do want to say I've got a story coming out. My last chapter of the book I call it Larry's Lost Years.
Okay.
Lost year after he left IU and before he got to Indiana State. And I went back and corrected some things and just filled in some blanks on that. But one of the things, and there's going to be 2 articles in the Indiana Basketball Hall of Fame magazine on this. They made a 2-part story, but one's a part Northwood Institute. He went there.
Right.
Yep. And ended up not playing, but he practiced the whole time and then realized he'd lose his eligibility. And then about the AAU basketball.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But I found a picture, the only picture I know of Larry in any kind of Northwood Institute attire.
Nice.
I'm proud of that.
Yeah.
I almost sent it to you, but I don't.
I'll save that one. No, I want to save that. That'll be for me to discover. So that's great.
So did you have another question?
No, no. If you've got one more story you want to share.
And I think that what we miss here too are all the moments that Larry could have done something that he'd be pumping gas in French Lick today.
Yeah.
He had so many moments where something came along and turned him, or he made the right decision. It's just amazing. And I talk about these throughout the book. But in that lost year, I think one of the guys that's been completely forgotten, and this came to me as I was putting it together. So Larry drops out of IU after 28 days. He comes back and everybody's upset. And Larry talks about it, and all the people that write about him talk about how upset everybody was. So it was probably his uncle on his mom's side that talked him. He knew the coach there at Northwood Institute, Larry Bledsoe, brought Larry in and said, look, Larry wants to play here. And Larry, an interview I had with Larry Bledsoe, he said, Larry didn't say anything. I didn't know if he did or not. His uncle sure he was going to go. So he practiced and practiced and practiced, and then ended up not playing. It just wasn't for him. And I talk about why some more, and I talk about those practices. There's just some very funny and interesting stories there that I don't think people know about, but you'll have to read the article on that one and the book. So then he quits, and he gets a job working for the city, and he likes it, and he's making money, and he buys a car. Finally, the family didn't have a car. He had to hitchhike back from French Lick, and I think his uncle went up and picked him up at Mitchell to get him home. There's 3 different versions of that people fight about. Beezer went up and got him. Kevin Mills went up and got him. So I don't know. Larry can tell you, I guess. And he's not. So about that time, Larry's father took his life.
Yeah.
And, Larry just had to be devastated.
Can't imagine.
And he's also kind of now twice he's quit basketball. So, what are the college coaches? I'm sure the junior college coaches are hanging around, but I'd say the main coach is saying, well, he couldn't make it at IU. And Northwood Institute.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So he goes from the highest to the lowest. And during all that, there's an AAU basketball was really big back then, recreational basketball. Every place had industrial leagues, basketball all over the place. And so Mitchell had an AAU team, and they would sponsor the state championship there at the old Emerson gym there in Mitchell. And one of the guys that played on that team was the football coach at French Lick, Chuck Akers. Chuck went to Larry and said, Larry, come play basketball. Well, around the tournament time, you went out and you brought in ringers. You draft
For sure,
people.
yeah.
So those state tournament teams had ex-college players and NBA and all sorts of things. Larry's team had Mike Flynn on it. Steve Lamb played on it too. But anyway,
awesome. So
Larry goes and plays. And he doesn't have a car. And I did an interview with a guy. One of the things I kept running into doing this work is I tell people what I was doing, and they'd say, I got a Larry Bird story. Everybody has a Larry Bird story. I've yet to meet somebody that doesn't have a Larry Bird story.
I think I can dig one up if out of my memory banks.
So there was this guy in one of my classes at Oakland City, in my grad classes, and I was telling my students, I got a Larry Bird story. I said, really? So he got an A for the class, by the way. But anyway, he was in junior high, and his dad was over the concession stand at this AAU tournament in Mitchell. So it was 8 teams. It was a Saturday and a Sunday. So after the first Saturday game, everybody went to eat, and Larry didn't have a car, and I guess he didn't have any money. So he stayed in the gym. And so here was this little boy and his dad, and the dad came, so what's wrong? He said, I don't have a car. And he said, hey, what do you want? So he goes to McDonald's, buys them all a meal, and they sit around on the bench and they talk basketball. little knowing who they were sitting with.
Amazing.
But imagine Larry at that moment. So he plays on an AAU team that wins the state, and this is how he gets back on Indiana State's radar. They play the Indiana All-Star team that supposedly had the best shooting team in their history.
Okay.
And Larry and the AAU team beat the All-Star team. Now, I don't know if I want to get in this or not, but all the narratives say that Larry was the leading scorer. Well,
maybe
he did. Read the book.
No, that's a great
teaser. There was another guy that was really good there, but Larry caught the attention. Obviously, the other guy was already through. He played at Bellarmine. He was an older guy. His name was Terry Morrison from New Albany. People, the old timers would know him, I'm sure. But that's how Hodges and got back interested.
That's great, but that fits with the Larry Bird narrative too, because he, of course, any great player ends up being a scorer, but that wasn't that wasn't how he defined himself. He defined himself as an all-around player, doing a little bit of everything, and I think that's what made him unique. And so, not even though it's interesting, it's not surprising to hear that he wasn't the leading scorer, because I'm sure he wanted to do a lot of other things.
So there were 3 games to win that AAU tournament. Larry was the leading scorer, I think, against the Indiana All-Stars, but not in the AAU tournament. So the leading scorer in the first game scored 32, and Larry scored 30.
Yeah.
The leader in the second game, the guy got 31, and Larry got 30. And then in the last game, the guy got 30, and Larry got 16. So Larry was in there, popping away, and he was the leading scorer in the game with the All-Stars. The other interesting thing I ran into there and reading about that is, I was reading this newspaper article praising Larry, but one guy said the big play of the game wasn't Larry Bird, it was Sam Drummer. Does that ring a bell?
I don't know that name, no.
Saddest story in Indiana high school basketball history. Sam Drummer was a player from Muncie Central, and he played on the All-Star team. He should have been Mr. Basketball, but it was Kyle Macy that year.
Okay.
So Drummer, the newspaper article said Drummer made a dunk on Larry that was over Larry. I mean, jumped over Larry. So I was at this meeting in Huntingburg called Legends, where all the Hall of Fame guys come to every year. And there was a guy there that had played at Georgia Tech, or had coached at Georgia Tech. And I mentioned Sam Drummer in this story. And he said, yeah, because Sam ended up playing at Georgia Tech. And he said, Sam made a dunk. He said, I can't describe it to you. He went up in the air, and he's in one hand, and it was behind his back, and front in the other hand. Somehow he scored. He said, I've never seen anything like it.
Amazing.
But Sam Drummer went back he was drafted and didn't make it. He went back to Muncie, and he ended up dying, actually murdered in a drug
crazy
thing. Yeah. Tragedy there.
Yeah, that's sad. Well, Larry was always better at getting wide like you rather than going vertical.
Yeah. Well, Larry could jump too.
He could.
Larry, so I'm looking up all these pictures for this, helping some people, this museum thing they're putting together. And they've got all these young kids. They had pictures of Mark Bird they thought were Larry.
I bet.
So they really like that I'm helping them.
Especially with the same number.
And after Larry got drafted by Boston, I found an article where a guy was describing how big Larry was. We forget how big Larry was, but if you see some of those pictures when he's coming out of the dressing room, he's got big thighs. He's got a big butt. I mean, he's just muscular and big.
Massive.
He's massive. And the guy's talking about his shovel-like hands. So I just found, I can send it to you. Somebody sent me a picture today of him holding a basketball, and holy cow, he's got these huge hands. And I think all the great athletes probably had, I always said Julius Erving had the biggest hands in sports, but they did. They all had, Gil Hodges was another guy who was famous for how large his hands were. But the great ones usually had really big, strong hands. And I suspect Larry was taller than 6'9.5" too. I think they lowballed it a little bit, because you see him in some of the pictures. And,
some of the guys want to, when you get to that certain height, you kind of want to lower it a little bit so that you don't get positioned up. Like if you're over 6'9", you have to play center, so if you can be like 6'9", 6'8", you can play small forward or forward.
He did it. I think he did it. If that's true, he did it psychologically, for just he's 6'9", he's out.
Yeah, you walk out there. Yeah. You're like, wait a second. Yeah, for sure.
So who knows? That's just my own guessing there about that. I'm sure Larry shrunk like the rest of us getting older.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you for joining us for this look back at the 1987 Final Four. Iconic Seasons is a principal podcast production. I'm your host and executive producer, Aaron Meyer. Robert was my contributor. Special thanks to all our guests for sharing their journeys. If you enjoyed this series, head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts, and follow the show. Make sure you leave us a rating and review. It really helps and helps others discover the show. If you're interested in a bonus episode, send us your questions via email. Our email address is hardwoodhistory@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next season with Iconic Seasons 1979.